At my engagement banquet, my future mother-in-law raised her glass and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "To the poorest man ever to marry into our family." The hall erupted in laughter, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. The room was a blur of crystal chandeliers, gilded mirrors, and white-gloved servers moving through a crowd that had no place for me. I was standing in the center, Claire's hand resting lightly on my arm, but it felt like even she wasn't really there. The laughter rolled around us like a wave, people leaning toward each other, covering their mouths, smirking as if I wasn't a person at all but a mistake standing in their perfect photograph. Her mother, Margaret, smiled with that thin, sharp smile people use when the cruelty is intentional. She let the stem of her glass tilt slightly in my direction, as though I was a charity case to be toasted, not a man about to marry her daughter. The chandeliers caught the edges of her emerald earrings, and I could see her lips curl before the second burst of laughter spread across the table. Claire looked away. She didn't laugh, but she didn't stop it either. She adjusted the napkin on her lap, her silence as loud as the ridicule. For a heartbeat, her fingers twitched toward mine then. As Margaret's gaze brushed her shoulder, she folded her hands back in her lap. My chest tightened, not because I was surprised Margaret had never hidden her disdain, but because the entire room had chosen to agree with her. They didn't even try to hide it. From the corner of the hall, a cousin in a black suit whispered just loud enough, "Look at him. He wore that same jacket last Christmas. Cheap fabric. You can see the wrinkles from here." His wife covered her mouth, pretending to cough, but her shoulders shook with laughter. A server walked past with a tray of champagne. My hand twitched, almost reaching for another glass, but I stopped. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me drink to drown it out. I kept my hand at my side, fingers brushing against the leather band of my father's old watch. The strap was worn smooth from years of use, the buckle slightly bent. Every time my thumb found it, I remembered his voice. "Strength is not in shouting, Michael. It's in knowing when to speak, and when silence says more." The voices around me grew bolder. Claire could have done better. Imagine bringing that into the Donovan family name. He's only here for the money. Nothing else makes sense. Each word slid across the room like a blade. Nobody defended me, not even Claire. Her brother, Victor, leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said loudly, "Don't worry, Mom. He'll be gone within a year. Men like him don't last." Not here. I stayed still. Straight-backed, expression flat, every muscle in my body begging me to react, to say something, to throw their words back. But I didn't. I met Victor's gaze once, just long enough for him to falter, before he looked away and reached for his glass. Silence became the only weapon I had left. What cut deepest wasn't the jokes or the smirks, it was the way the room moved on, as if I wasn't even there. They laughed, clinked glasses, called for more wine, a circle of wealth and pride, and I was treated like the air in between. A woman in a sequin dress leaned across her husband's shoulder, eyes scanning me like a piece of cheap furniture. "Claire must be embarrassed," she said. "He looks like he walked in from the street." Her husband chuckled, and the couple beside them joined in. It was effortless for them, this cruelty, casual, as if my dignity was disposable. The waiter nearest to me hesitated, his tray wobbling slightly as he tried to avoid my gaze. Even he seemed afraid of being seen offering me respect. That was the weight of the atmosphere. They didn't just mock me, they erased me. I was the invisible man, standing at my own engagement banquet. I caught a glimpse of myself, reflected in one of the tall mirrors lining the hall. Plain suit. Tired face. Hands clasped in front of me. To them, it confirmed the joke. To me, it was a reminder that appearances never tell the whole story. But they didn't care. They didn't want to know. Margaret stood again, placing her hand over Claire's shoulder. "My daughter has a kind heart," she said, smiling sweetly at the crowd. "And sometimes kind hearts make unwise choices. But we forgive her. After all, love can be blind. The laughter that followed was sharper, louder, echoing off the marble floor. Claire's fingers twitched against her napkin. But still, she said nothing. I looked around the room at the hundreds of eyes fixed on me with disdain. Senators, bankers, old money investors, their wives draped in pearls and diamonds. Every glance said the same thing. From a far table, a man in an understated suit, James Crawford, a rival CEO whose company often circled the Donovans, watched without joining the laughter. He didn't look away when I met his eyes. Then, the room swallowed him again, and for the first time, I wondered if that was why you're here with me, listening now. Maybe you felt that sting, the kind that makes you shrink inside yourself, while everyone else looks away. If this is bringing back memories, I'd like you to share them with me. I read every story, and I want to know if you've ever stood in a room where your voice didn't matter. The pianist in the corner shifted into a brighter tune, as if the music could wash away the humiliation. But it couldn't. The air was thick with it. Richard Hale, the family's lawyer, slid into the seat beside me, his cufflinks glinting. He leaned close enough that only a few nearby could hear. "Michael," he said, his voice smooth and cutting. "You're a decent man. But let's be honest, if you really loved Claire, you wouldn't let her tie herself to someone who brings nothing to the table." He tapped the polished wood with his index finger. "You've got no name, no fortune, no influence. That's not love. That's selfishness." He straightened his tie and leaned back, the smirk still on his face. The people within earshot laughed softly, nodding. Margaret's smile widened. I didn't answer him. My hand tightened over the watch, my jaw locking for just a second before I forced it loose. Richard mistook it for defeat. He chuckled, lifted his glass, and said to no one in particular, "Some men mistake patience for power, but power speaks. Silence is just emptiness." The words hung in the air. Guests repeated them under their breath, amused, reassured that the lawyer had put me in my place. The dinner carried on, plates of food arriving, glasses refilled. Conversations hummed, punctuated with more glances at me, more whispers. They laughed at stories, told jokes, never once including me. Claire's hand stayed on her lap, not on mine. She laughed politely at her cousin's jokes, but not at mine because I hadn't spoken a word. The exclusion wasn't just in the laughter, it was in the way the servers set plates, skipping me until last. The way no one met my eye for long. The way the toast had erased me, turned me from groom to guest, then from guest to nothing. The longer it went on, the more their confidence grew. A cousin's teenage son leaned over to his friend and whispered, "He doesn't even know how to hold a wine glass." They giggled, not realizing I could hear them. A woman nearby glanced at me, then deliberately shifted her chair to face away. Every move, every sound in that room was a message. You're not wanted here. You don't exist here. And still I stayed silent, because silence was not emptiness. Silence was waiting. The night wore on, but the cruelty didn't stop. At one point, Victor raised his glass and said, "To Claire for being brave enough to settle for less. Much less." The laughter that followed was deafening. Margaret clapped politely, eyes glinting with victory. Claire lowered her gaze, face pale. Her thumb rubbed the edge of her napkin raw, then stilled. I adjusted the strap of my father's watch, felt the leather press into my wrist, and let the weight of their words pass over me. If you've ever been in that place where silence feels like the only shield you have, you'll understand why I kept my composure. And if you're still listening now, walking through this memory with me, it means these stories matter to you the way they matter to me. Stay here with me. We'll keep going together. The banquet continued. The lights shimmered on gold-trimmed walls. The laughter rose and fell like a tide. And I stood in the center of it all, invisible to everyone but myself. The laughter from Margaret's toast still clung to the air long after people returned to their seats. It was as if every sound in the hall had been adjusted to make sure I could not forget it. Even when the pianist shifted into another song, the notes felt hollow, an echo that reminded me of my place in their eyes. Victor was the first to speak again. He leaned back, his chair balanced on two legs, his voice raised so the nearby tables could hear. "You know what's funny?" he said, swirling his drink. "Michael here probably thinks love will keep him at this table. He doesn't realize we eat men like him for breakfast." People chuckled, nodding as if it were the most natural thing to say. Claire stiffened, but she didn't respond. She sat with her fork poised above her plate, eyes focused on nothing. The lawyer, Richard Hale, tapped his glass gently, drawing attention back to himself. "Victor has a point," he said smoothly. "Families like this survive on alliances, deals, names. Michael, I admire your courage, but if you really cared about Claire, wouldn't you want her to have a future with stability?" He smiled, spreading his hands as if he'd just delivered a reasonable argument instead of an insult. My silence only encouraged them. The absence of a reaction turned me into a blank canvas they could paint on however they wanted. They didn't just mock me, they reshaped me in front of everyone into their version of who I was. Weak, desperate, unworthy. A cousin in a velvet jacket leaned over, his voice dripping with amusement. "Tell me, Michael, do you even know how to use 3 forks at dinner? Or is that not a thing where you come from?" The table erupted. Claire's cousin slapped the table, tears of laughter in her eyes. I looked at the fork beside my plate, picked it up calmly, and set it down again. I didn't speak. The laughter faltered for a moment before Victor filled the silence with another jab. "See? He doesn't even know how to fight back." It wasn't only their words that cut. It was the way the room shifted around me. Servers avoided eye contact. Guests leaned their chairs subtly away from me, as if sharing proximity might stain them. Every detail was deliberate. They were showing me the boundaries of their world, and I was placed firmly outside them. Claire finally spoke, her voice quiet. "Maybe we should stop." Margaret turned sharply. "Don't defend him. You'll embarrass yourself." That was all it took. Claire lowered her gaze again, her hands folding in her lap. The silence that followed wasn't in my control. This time, it was hers. I pressed my fingers against the band of my father's watch. The leather was cracked, soft from decades of wear. He had worn it every day of his life until the day he placed it in my hands. I remembered his voice then, not loud but steady. "Strength is in timing. Never let them see you break too soon." The room blurred for a moment as that memory anchored me. When I looked up, Richard was already moving in again, eager to fill the void. "Michael, forgive me for being blunt," he said, his voice carrying farther now. "But you bring nothing to this family. Not a name, not a fortune, not even the proper education. Claire deserves a man who can lift her, not weigh her down." He leaned back, satisfied, and raised his glass. The people near him clinked theirs in agreement. I remained silent, but my eyes met his. For the first time, Richard's smile flickered. The guests around him noticed. A murmur ran through the group. They expected me to shrink further, but I didn't. I just held his gaze. The silence turned sharp, almost uncomfortable. He looked away first, pretending to adjust his cufflink. Victor tried to recover the momentum. "Don't look at him like that, Richard. He's harmless. Like a stray dog you feed once, and it never leaves." Another round of laughter. The air thickened with the scent of perfume and wine, heavy and suffocating. Conversations rose again, circling around me but never including me. They spoke of vacations, businesses, political connections, every word. A reminder of the world they believed I couldn't touch. A woman in pearls leaned toward her friend, her voice meant to carry. "It's tragic, really. Claire could have been a senator's wife. Instead, she'll be stuck with This. Her friend nodded, lips curling. Don't worry. It won't last. It never does. Claire's hand twitched as if to reach for mine, but she stopped midway. Her fingers returned to her lap. I noticed. So did everyone else, and yet I stayed still, because silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. At moments like these, I think about you, whoever you are, sitting there listening. Maybe you've been through something like this too. Maybe you've sat in a room where everyone decided who you were without ever asking, where you were talked over, ignored, erased. If you have, I want you to stay with me through this. Share what that moment felt like for you. I want to hear it. This isn't just my story. It belongs to anyone who's been silenced. The night dragged on. Margaret delivered another toast, this one dripping with fake pity. To my daughter's generosity, she said, smiling at me as though I were a lost pet she'd reluctantly taken in. She has always cared for the less fortunate. The laughter was immediate, crueler than before. Claire's face flushed. She looked at me, but the words never came. I exhaled slowly, pressing the watch tighter against my wrist. Silence again. Not because I didn't have words, but because their cruelty didn't deserve them. And in that silence, something shifted. They mistook it for weakness. But one day, they would realize it was the opposite. The banquet continued under its glittering lights, and I endured each glance, each whispered insult, each deliberate exclusion. The night was long, and the storm had only begun. The banquet had grown louder, the air filled with the hum of conversations and the scrape of silverware, but none of it reached me. What I heard most clearly were the gaps, the pauses after each insult, the expectant glances waiting to see if I would finally break. Victor leaned across the table, his smile sharp. You know, Richard's right. Without us, you're nothing. Without Claire, you'd still be eating lunch in some cheap diner, counting loose change. His words carried, and people nearby laughed with relief. The cruelty had become a sport, and I was their entertainment. Claire shifted uncomfortably, but when Margaret rested a hand on her shoulder, she froze. She opened her mouth once, then closed it again. That silence was worse than anything Victor said. She wasn't defending me. She was choosing them. Richard Hale picked up the thread again, leaning back in his chair like a judge delivering a verdict. Michael, forgive me, but men like you, men without pedigree, always believe love is enough. But love doesn't keep families like ours alive. Money, alliances, reputation, those are the things that matter. The people around him nodded. Some clapped quietly. I said nothing. My fingers found the edge of the fountain pen in my jacket pocket. It was an old piece, black with a small silver clip, my father's. He had pressed it into my hand the day I graduated. This will sign more than papers, he'd said. It will sign who you are. I rolled it between my fingers now. A silent reminder. Victor wasn't finished. Do you even have a future plan, Michael? Or is marrying into our family your one accomplishment? Claire flinched. I saw her eyes dart to me, then away again. She whispered, Victor, stop. But her voice was weak, barely a thread. Margaret laughed, raising her glass. He won't stop, dear. Boys will be boys. And this one, she nodded toward me, needs to learn where he stands. The guests applauded lightly, as though it were a performance they had come to expect. A woman in a navy dress leaned across her table, her pearls catching the light. It's embarrassing, really. Claire deserves better, her husband chuckled. This marriage will never survive. You'll see. Each word wasn't just ridicule. It was betrayal. Layered on betrayal. Not only from strangers, but from the people who should have stood beside me. I looked at Claire again. She stared at her plate, her fork moving slowly through untouched food. She didn't raise her head. I thought of my father in that moment, his last days, sitting in his chair with the watch loose on his wrist. His voice had been soft but steady. "Michael, life will test you in front of others. Let them speak. Let them laugh. But remember, when the time comes, speak once, and speak so they can never forget it." I had carried those words with me ever since. Victor raised his glass again. "Here's to my sister, for finding love in the strangest places. Charity work comes in many forms." Laughter rang out. Louder this time. Even the servers smiled faintly. Caught in the atmosphere, my silence felt like surrender to them. But inside, it was steel. I glanced around the room, meeting eyes one by one. The laughter softened, just for a moment. When they realized I wasn't shrinking, I wasn't embarrassed. I was waiting. Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice so only a handful nearby could hear. "Michael, if you walk away tonight, I could help you. Quietly. Save you the embarrassment. You don't belong here. Everyone knows it." He expected me to look away, to crumble. Instead, I held his gaze. He blinked first. The room shifted slightly. Some guests noticed. Their laughter wasn't as confident now. Victor tried to cover it, slapping the table. "Don't take it personally, Michael. We're just having fun. You should laugh too." But I didn't laugh. The air was cold, heavy with judgment. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, weighing me, discarding me. I pressed the watch against my wrist again, the leather warm under my palm. Silence was my shield. Timing was my weapon. And though they didn't know it, the clock was ticking for all of them. If you're still here with me, listening through this storm, I wonder how you've endured moments when the people closest to you failed to stand beside you. If this feels familiar, share it. There's strength in knowing we've all walked through the same fire, even if we walked it alone. The banquet carried on. Plates cleared, glasses refilled, more laughter, more whispers. They believed they were winning. They believed their words were truth. But I knew the truth was still in my pocket. Waiting. The pen. The watch. The silence. 3 things they had overlooked. 3 things that would decide everything. The wedding day came with the kind of spectacle families like the Donovans were known for. White roses lined the driveway, a carpet of petals led into the estate, and a tent larger than most banquet halls had been built to hold the 1,000 guests. I stood at the altar, dressed in a simple dark suit. No jeweled cufflinks, no designer tie. Just the same watch on my wrist, and the same silence I had carried since the night of the banquet. Socially, I'd been going by Michael Ray. Cruz had negotiated the Donovan partnership through a subsidiary, and my legal surname never touched their public filings or invitations. It was easy for them to assume I was no one. The guests filed in, their eyes grazing over me as though I were furniture placed incorrectly in the room. Conversations swirled, some in whispers, some loud enough for me to hear. "Still can't believe Claire is marrying him. He looks out of place. Like the waiter got lost. Don't worry, it won't last. He'll be gone before the ink dries." The air was filled with perfume, expensive cologne, and disdain. I felt it in the way they avoided looking at me directly, then turned to whisper behind jeweled hands. The priest cleared his throat, his voice steady as he began the vows. But before he could finish the first line, Margaret stood. Her emerald gown shimmered under the lights, her chin raised high. "Before my daughter agrees," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly, "tell us, Michael, how much wealth does your family even have? What do you bring to this table?" The words echoed in the tent. Then came the laughter. A man in a striped suit leaned toward his wife. "He brings nothing. That's what." A woman snapped a photo with her phone. "This is going viral, caption it. Thrift store Groom." Another guest muttered, "He'll stain the Donovan name before the year is out." Phones lit up. Cameras clicked. The humiliation was now permanent. Recorded. Shared. before I could even breathe. Victor, standing a few steps away, grinned wide enough for everyone to see. "Mother's right," he said, turning to the guests. "We deserve honesty today. Does he have anything? Or is this marriage just a ticket into our world?" The laughter grew louder, the voices overlapping into a chorus of mockery. Claire shifted beside me. Her lips parted as if she might speak, but when her mother's hand brushed her arm, she fell silent. Again, I stood motionless, my hands clasped in front of me, eyes scanning the crowd. Senators, bankers, influencers, every one of them enjoying the spectacle. Every one of them certain I was powerless. The priest cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should—" "No," Margaret cut in. "We deserve an answer. We deserve to know what this man is worth." The tent roared with approval. Guests banged their glasses against tables, chanting softly, "What is he worth? What is he worth?" The chant grew, and the laughter became unbearable. I felt the weight of the watch against my wrist, the edge of the pen in my pocket pressing lightly against my chest. My father's voice came back to me in fragments. "Strength is in timing. Speak once, and make sure they never forget it." I looked at Margaret, then at Victor, then at the crowd. Their voices were a storm, but storms eventually silence themselves. I reached for the microphone. I had paired the projector with a private receiver earlier. The board had voted this morning. The countersigned termination letter sat under embargo. One tap would lift it and push the statement live and onto the screen. My movements were calm, deliberate. The guests noticed and began to quiet, curiosity tugging at the edges of their ridicule. I lifted the microphone slowly. My voice, when it came, was cold and dry. Each word measured. "Thank you," I said, pausing to let the sound settle. "Thank you for showing me your true faces." The room stilled, glasses lowered. Even Victor's grin faltered slightly. "This wedding," I continued, "ends here." Gasps erupted. Some laughed nervously, thinking I was bluffing. Others leaned forward, eager to see a final breakdown. Victor barked a laugh. "You're insane. You don't end this, we end you." Margaret sneered. "You'll walk out of here with nothing. Without us, you're invisible." I didn't look at them. My hand slipped into my pocket. The pen brushed against my fingers, but I didn't pull it out. Instead, I pulled out the phone. The crowd murmured. Whispers crackling through the air. Claire's face drained of color. "Michael, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. My thumb hovered over the screen, a quiet promise in that single gesture. The guests leaned forward, their laughter replaced by unease. The tent that moments ago had been alive with mocking voices now held its breath. One press. That was all it would take. And in that silence, they finally realized silence had never been emptiness. It had always been control. The tent was so quiet that even the chandeliers seemed to stop trembling. 1,000 eyes fixed on me, waiting for the humiliation to finally crush me. They had laughed for so long. They couldn't imagine silence meant anything else. I held the phone steady, my thumb brushing the screen. One press was enough. The projector at the back of the tent flickered, then came to life. A bold message filled the screen. Cruise Holdings terminates its $1.1 billion partnership with Donovan Group. Effective immediately. The silence broke like glass. Gasps, frantic whispers, phones buzzing as notifications spread through the guests. Heads turned. Margaret's face drained of color. Victor's hand dropped his glass, shattering it against the polished floor. Richard Hale blinked hard, his mouth opening and closing with no words. What is this?" Someone cried out. I lifted the microphone again. My voice was low, but every syllable cut through the panic. "I am not here for your approval. I never was. My name is Michael Reyes, and I am the CEO of Cruise Holdings, the company you mocked without realizing it was mine." The words landed like a hammer. Margaret staggered a step backward, her emerald dress rustling as she clutched the chair behind her. That's impossible. You. It's the truth, I said flatly. Victor's face twisted with rage. You lied to us. You tricked us. No, I replied, my voice cold. I stayed silent while you showed the world who you really are. The crowd buzzed louder, phones already lighting with headlines. Wedding scandal. Donovan humiliates Groom. Who controls $1B deal? Investors texted each other furiously. A few slipped quietly out the back, unwilling to be tied to a sinking name. Richard finally found his voice. Michael, let's be reasonable. We can renegotiate. This doesn't have to end like this. I stared at him. You said silence was emptiness. Today, it was everything. His face pallid. Margaret pressed forward, desperation in her eyes. We didn't know. You must understand we thought you were no one. Forgive us. Restore the contract. I didn't move. Claire stepped forward then, her voice trembling. Michael, I didn't laugh. I wanted to defend you. I still love you. I turned my head toward her. For a brief moment, the softness of her voice pierced through the noise. But then, I remembered her silence, her eyes cast down when I needed her most. You loved their approval more than me, I said, my words sharp as glass. That was your choice. Her tears spilled over. But I looked away. The tent was chaos, now guests rushing to check stock updates. Whispers of collapse spreading like fire. Donovan Group, publicly traded, began to slide within minutes as the statement hit the wire. Investors abandoned them. Allies turned cold. Victor's face burned red. You'll regret this, Reyes. You think you're powerful. But this family doesn't lose. I stepped closer to him, my voice even. Families like yours don't lose because you play fair. You lose when truth arrives. He faltered, looking away. His fists clenched uselessly at his sides. I slipped the fountain pen from my pocket, holding it up for the crowd to see. The same pen my father had given me years ago. This pen signed the contract you bragged about. And this pen ended it. Gasps rippled through the room again. Margaret fell to her knees, her voice breaking. Please, forgive us. We can make this right. We didn't mean... Her words dissolved into the noise of phones buzzing, guests fleeing, reputations crumbling. I tightened my grip on the pen. My father's words echoed in my mind. Speak once. Make sure they never forget it. And I had. The screen still glowed with the statement that had shattered the Donovan empire. Guests no longer whispered, they shouted, cursed, scrambled for the exits. Phones rang in frantic succession. A senator's wife hissed to her husband, "Get us out of here before the cameras arrive." He grabbed her arm, dragging her past overturned chairs. Margaret stumbled forward, clutching my sleeve. Her nails dug in, her voice raw. "Michael, no, Mr. Reyes, please. This is a mistake. We'll apologize publicly. We'll repair the contract. Don't destroy us." I pulled my arm free. My voice was flat. "You destroyed yourselves the moment you mocked me." She froze, lips trembling. Richard Hale tried next. His voice, usually smooth and commanding, now cracked. "Listen, we can adjust terms. I can draft amendments right away. Just overlook tonight. None of this has to be permanent." I turned my eyes on him. "You said love without fortune was selfish. Tell me, Richard, was it selfish to stay silent while you laughed at me?" His mouth worked soundlessly. Sweat beaded at his forehead. Victor shoved through the crowd, his face flushed, jaw tight. "Enough. You may have money, Reyes, but you'll never belong here. You'll never have family." The words were meant to cut, but they sounded weak now, almost desperate. I stepped toward him. My voice carried coldly across the tent. "Family. You mean the people who cheered while your mother humiliated me? The people who erased me in my own place at this altar? If that's family, I want no part of it. Victor's fists curled, but he didn't move. Behind him, guests stared, uneasy. His power was gone. Every eye that once admired him now measured how far he might fall. Claire's voice broke through the noise. Michael, please. I'm sorry. I should have defended you. I was afraid. But I love you. Can't we start again? The ache in her voice was real. For a second, the memory of her smile, of nights when she laughed freely with me, flashed in my mind. But then the louder memory returned the silence when I needed her voice most. I shook my head. My words were steady, final. You chose them. That choice can't be undone. Her face crumpled. She reached for me, but I stepped back. The watch on my wrist pressed against my skin, reminding me of the lesson my father had drilled into me. Respect cannot be begged, for it must be lived. Around us, chaos tightened its grip. Investors shouted into phones. Their voices panicked. Sell. Now sell everything. One man clutched his head as news updates pinged across his screen. Donovan stock collapses $1. 1B deal terminated. The influencer who had snapped a photo earlier shrieked as her phone buzzed nonstop. The cruel caption she'd written was now circulating, her name trending for all the wrong reasons. This will ruin me, she whispered, her hands shaking. Margaret sank into a chair, her chest heaving. The emerald dress that had once sparkled now looked garish under the harsh light. Around her, the friends who had laughed loudest only hours ago edged away, distancing themselves as though her downfall might stain them too. Richard Hale's phone rang. He answered, his face turning ashen. He closed it slowly, then looked at me. I've just been dismissed. My firm won't keep me after this. I said nothing. Victor stood rigid, his jaw clenched, but even he could see the shifting tides. The allies who once toasted him now avoided his gaze. A woman muttered to her friend, "No one will touch the Donovans after this. They're finished." The priest who had begun the vows earlier closed his book quietly, stepping back from the altar as though refusing to be tied to the ruins. Claire's sobs echoed, but they were lost in the sea of panic. I walked to the edge of the altar, each step steady, deliberate. The noise around me didn't touch me anymore. My silence was heavier than their cries. For a moment, I looked at them, the family that had mocked me, the guests who had erased me, the woman who had stayed silent beside me, all undone, all exposed. And I spoke once more, my voice clear, cold as stone. You thought silence was weakness. Tonight, it was judgment. The words fell like a gavel. No one argued. No one laughed. Behind me, the screen continued to flash with updates. Each notification, another nail in the Donovan coffin. Their empire was collapsing in real time, and I no longer needed to lift a hand. I pressed the watch against my wrist, felt the pen in my pocket. The board vote had closed this morning. My tap only lifted the embargo. My father's voice echoed softly inside me. Speak once. They'll never forget. And they wouldn't. I stepped down from the altar. Behind me, the tent seethed with noise, panic, whispers, sobs. But ahead, the night air waited, calm and still. The roses lining the path swayed lightly in the breeze, untouched by the chaos inside. Claire called my name once more, her voice breaking. I didn't turn. There was nothing left between us but silence, and for once, that silence was not mine to bear. It was hers. A figure emerged near the entrance. Tall, composed, his suit understated but sharp. James Crawford, the rival CEO whose company had often stood against the Donovans, watched me with quiet eyes. He extended his hand. You've shown them who you are, he said, voice steady. If you choose, we can build something real business, yes, but also a future not chained by their cruelty. I looked at him. There was no arrogance in his tone, no hunger to claim me as a trophy. Only respect. I placed my hand in his, firm but calm. A silent agreement passed between us. Together we walked past the guests who had once laughed the loudest. They parted now, their eyes lowered, their voices hushed. Not one dared to meet my gaze. Outside, a car waited. I paused before stepping in, the cool night pressing against my skin. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the old photograph of my father and me, edges worn from years of handling. For a moment, I held it against the light. His smile stared back. Steady, reassuring. "I'm never alone," I whispered. I slipped the photo back into my pocket and closed the car door behind me. Inside, the noise of the collapsing empire faded with distance. Margaret's desperate pleas, Richard's ruined career, Victor's broken pride, Claire's tears all left behind. By the time the estate disappeared from view, they were already history. I leaned back in the seat, the weight of the watch against my wrist, a reminder not of what I had lost, but of what I had chosen: dignity. The world outside moved quickly. Within hours, news outlets carried the story: Donovan wedding scandal. Groom revealed as CEO, family fortune collapses. Sponsors dropped them. Old friends withdrew invitations. Politicians erased their names from speeches. Consequences fell quietly, like stones into water. No explosion, no spectacle, just the steady pull of gravity, dragging them down. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their downfall was not my victory, it was simply truth revealed. James sat across from me, his voice calm. "You ended them with one decision. But more than that, you reminded everyone watching. Respect cannot be bought." I said nothing, only nodded. The truth didn't need decoration. Days later, I walked into my office, not as the invisible man at a banquet, but as myself. Employees greeted me not with fear, but with quiet trust. They had seen the headlines. They knew now, if they hadn't before, that silence was not weakness. I carried the pen with me to every meeting after that, not for contracts, but as a reminder of my father's lesson. Each time it touched the page, I remembered his voice. "Speak once. They'll never forget." And I remembered the night I finally did. For you listening now, if you've ever been mocked, underestimated, or silenced, you know the weight of that moment. This story isn't just mine, it's yours. Because dignity is not noise. It's the strength to hold your ground until the right time comes. The fight doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be steady. It needs to be yours. And if this story stayed with you, if you've walked through pain like this yourself, I'd be glad to have you stay here with me. Share what you carry. Walk with me through the next story. Because no one should ever walk through silence alone.